Interview skills for graduates. What is the purpose of a job interview? The purpose of a job interview is to assess you in person. So how well do you express yourself? The employer is looking for your motivation and enthusiasm for the role. Will you fit into their organisation, team? Are they offering what you want? It's your opportunity to find out more. Can you show that you meet the person's specification that they're asking for? And you will be assessed against the required skills, knowledge, and experience for the role that you have applied for. Well, this diagram here is a visual representation of common interview types. So the way in which an interview can be conducted. So in person, so on the phone, in the panel, so you and a number of representatives from the organisation. Could be quite an informal chat, or it could be via screen, some form of virtual interaction. How do we prepare for interviews? Well, first of all, we need to concentrate on something called commercial awareness. So you've been offered the interview. How do you present yourself, prepare to present yourself to the employer, and what do you know about the organisation and role that you're applying to? So first of all, remind yourself about why you were interested in the organisation, the role. What was it that first interested you, that has made you apply, and that you have put in your written application that the employer's obviously noticed, but you need to be able to articulate that in person in an interview. Secondly, part of that is the general commercial awareness. So what is it about the organisation and the role? What do you know about that organisation, the role, the markets they're in, their products, their service? It's all about developing an understanding of the organisation, the products that and services that they deliver, and the competitors that they are facing. So the second part of interview preparation is the person specification. So that is this set of skills, qualities, knowledge, and experience that the employer is looking for. So when you complete the job application or update your CV or go for a job interview, you have to demonstrate that you have the required skills and qualities, that you meet the person specification, and you must provide evidence and examples of how you meet that spec. So it's not an exam where you have to remember facts and figures. You're being asked about you, your experiences, your skills and qualities, and your motivation for the job. So you need to know how to draw on those and articulate them on demand in an interview. When you know that you've prepared a few answers, so for example, you know you will always get asked, why do you want the job? Why have you applied for this role, for example, along with knowing what you're going to say about your own skills, knowledge, and experiences, you will start to feel confident about going into the interview. So based on the person specification for the job, knowing your own skills and qualities, you can prepare short scenarios or little packets of experience that you can bring up at an interview situation to answer a range of questions. And we'll talk about that shortly. So in terms of the evidence, the pockets of experience that we are referred to, so your evidence, these are some of the examples where you can get those kind of examples from. So how, these are things that you might be doing now alongside your current studies or have experienced some of these activities, but they will provide evidence of some of the attributes on the person specification. So, for example, if you're asked about communication skills, any number of these activities on this list that you may or may not have been involved in will be able to provide evidence for that particular attribute. Working as part of a team, again, if you're involved in any of these, it will involve some of that. So that's what I mean by thinking of different examples from your evidence, from your experiences. So it could be, so placement is one there. So that's quite common for some courses across the university. Within a work placement, within part-time work, there will be, an employer might say, give me an example of a time when you've done whatever a particular activity is. And there may be a very specific time within a part-time job or within a placement where you've experienced something like that, and you'll be able to draw on that in the interview and talk about it. We're going to come on to onto that in a minute. So when I say talking about your attributes in an interview situation, this is what I'm referring to. So we've looked at what the employer is looking for and the evidence. So the particular skills they're interested in, your evidence. This little method, this STAR method, STAR technique, you might have heard of. This is how you bring those two parts together and how you demonstrate that you have those required attributes. So the person specification is the skills and qualities and experience required by someone to do the job. We've just looked at that. We've looked at where to get the evidence from. So this is how you bring the two together. So the S stands for explain the broad situation. So the interviewer understands the context of what you're going to talk about, but they don't need to know every detail. So you could say, I'm a student at the University of Greater Manchester. That would be the situation, the background. Next, you talk about the particular task or problem or challenge that you are going to describe. And it could be working as part of a team in some way, a project, a presentation, or something that you had to do. And that's, again, a brief outline of that. The A is the action. So everything that you personally, you individually took to complete the task or to reach the end goal. And within that little story that you're telling, you highlight the skills or character traits that are addressed, that you know that the employer is looking for. So that is the main part of your answer. So again, think of different examples: working in a team, using effective communication skills, overcoming a challenge, things like that that employers might ask you about. The A is the action, everything you did in that particular scenario. And then R is the result. So it says there, explain the positive outcomes or results of your actions or efforts. So on the other hand, I mean, that's fine, but on the other hand, it may be that it wasn't a positive outcome, and therefore, that's not a bad thing, because then you can talk about how you would change things if you're in the same situation again, or how you have learned from what happened. So yeah, you can always find more information on this STAR technique on through Student Hub or the Prospects website. Lots of information out there about it, but it's good to try and practice it ahead of an interview. So a few general points then about answering interview questions, just to finish with. So always be positive, even when things have gone wrong. Avoid derogatory comments about yourself in particular, but certainly about others as well. Or, even if you've not quite got something that they're asking for, just avoid negative language within your responses. But also, recognise simple questions that they're asking that don't require particularly lengthy answers. Always, if you haven't heard or understood, ask for clarification. Don't, try and waffle along and think you know what they're talking about. It's a two-way process. So make sure you do get the good understanding before you answer the question. It also gives you a bit more time to think about your answer. And certainly don't tell untruths, don't lie. It might seem like you're exaggerating or you're embellishing something, but you just never know when you'd be found out. Okay, so I hope you've got something from these tips on interview technique. Thank you very much for listening. There are contact details. We're based in the Student Centre. You can always drop in to speak to us or make an appointment to speak to us, and we can provide further support around interviews if that's what you would like.